The note was sitting on the kitchen counter when I came downstairs that Tuesday morning, folded in half, my name written on the outside in my son's handwriting. I remember thinking it was a grocery list, or maybe a reminder about the cable bill. I poured my coffee first. I always pour my coffee first. 43 years of getting up at 5:30 in the morning to drive a city bus through the streets of Cincinnati will do that to you. You learn to take the quiet moments when you can get them. I unfolded the note. Dad, we need you out by Friday. Suzanne and I have decided to sell the house. We've already listed it. There's nothing to discuss. You can stay with Uncle Bud or find a place of your own. You're retired. You have money. Figure it out. You have money. Figure it out. Cole, I read it twice. Then I set it down on the counter next to my coffee mug, and I stood there in my socks on the cold tile floor, and I listened to the house. Upstairs I could hear my son's wife moving around in the bedroom. The shower running. Normal morning sounds. Like they hadn't just handed me a piece of paper that said, "Your time here is done, old man." This was my house. I bought it in 1987 with my wife Loretta. We raised Cole in this house. He learned to ride a bike in the driveway. Loretta died in the bedroom upstairs. In the bed she picked out herself from a furniture store on Montgomery Road, with the quilt her mother made draped over her feet. I had paid off the mortgage 11 years ago. I had the deed in a fireproof box in the hall closet, and my son had just left me a note telling me to be out by Friday. I sat down at the kitchen table and I thought about Cole when he was 7 years old, how he used to run to the door when I got home from my route, how he'd grab my hand and pull me toward the backyard to show me whatever he'd found that day, a caterpillar, a cool rock, a bird's nest fallen from the oak tree. I thought about all the overtime I worked to put him through Ohio State. I thought about the year Loretta got sick and I took on a second job driving for a private car service on weekends so we could cover her medication costs without touching what I'd been saving for Cole's future. I thought about all of that, and then I picked up the note and I folded it again and I put it in my shirt pocket. I had some phone calls to make. Cole was 34. He'd married Suzanne about 4 years back, a woman he met at a conference in Columbus. She worked in real estate. I want to be fair here, because this story isn't really about disliking Suzanne, but I will say that from the very first Thanksgiving she sat at my table, there was something in the way she looked around the house, calculating, almost, like she was taking measurements. Cole had always been a little distant since his mother passed, but after the wedding, that distance turned into something else. Calls got shorter. Visits stopped unless they needed something. About 2 years ago, Cole asked if they could move in temporarily while their condo was being renovated. I said, of course. He was my son. This was his home too. The renovation took 6 weeks. They were still here 18 months later. I didn't complain. I'm not the complaining type. But I noticed things. The way Suzanne started referring to our house in conversations. The way she rearranged the living room without asking. The way she'd started receiving packages addressed to her at this address. Mail order things, furniture catalogues, a subscription wine club. Little roots being put down. Cole had changed his job about a year into their stay, left his position at the logistics company, and started doing something in property investment with a partner named Dwight, a man I'd met exactly once and immediately didn't trust. Dwight had the handshake of someone who wanted you to think he was more confident than he was, and eyes that moved around a room even when he was talking directly to you. Cole seemed excited about it. Suzanne seemed even more excited. I kept my opinions to myself. I should have asked more questions. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not because I could have stopped what was coming, but because I would have understood sooner what I was actually dealing with. I called my attorney that same morning. His name is Edmund Voss, and I've known him for 26 years. He handled the legal work when Loretta and I bought the house. He handled her estate when she passed, and he is the kind of lawyer who picks up his own phone. Ed, I said, my son left me a note this morning saying he's selling my house and I need to be out by Friday. There was a pause on the line. Tell me you're joking, Hal, he said. I'm not joking, he said. I'm not joking. Okay, another pause. Don't move anything. Don't sign anything. Don't have any conversations with Cole or his wife about this until we talk in person. Can you come in today? I was in his office by 10 o'clock. Ed pulled up everything while I sat across from his desk. The deed, the property tax records, the trust documentation. Loretta and I had set up a revocable living trust back in 2009 on Ed's recommendation, which held the house and most of our financial assets. When Loretta died, I became the sole trustee. Cole was listed as the beneficiary, which meant he would inherit, but which absolutely did not mean he had any authority over the property while I was alive. "This is still your house, Hal," Ed said, sliding a copy of the trust document across the desk. 100%. He cannot list it, he cannot sell it, he cannot remove you from it. Then how did he list it? Ed typed something, clicked around on his screen for a minute. "He hasn't," he said, "or if he did, it's not showing on MLS yet. He may be bluffing, or he may have spoken to someone who gave him very bad information." That was possibility one. Possibility two, which Ed raised carefully, was worse, that Cole or Dwight had found some way to try to create fraudulent documentation. Ed said he'd seen it before, not often, but it happened. Adult children, sometimes with help from unscrupulous third parties, attempting to forge signatures or misrepresent ownership to a real estate agent who didn't look closely enough. "I want to know which one it is," I said. "So do I," said Ed. He made some calls that afternoon. By the end of the day, we had a clearer picture, and it was not a comforting one. What Ed found was this. Cole had gone to a real estate agent, a woman affiliated with the firm where Suzanne had contacts, and represented himself as the co-owner of the property. He'd submitted paperwork that included an adopted version of a quitclaim deed, my signature forged, a notary stamp that Ed said was almost certainly fraudulent, transferring a 50% ownership interest to Cole. The listing had not gone live yet, but it had been submitted internally. The agent, whether out of negligence or willful blindness, had accepted the paperwork without verifying ownership through the county recorder's office. There was more. Dwight's name appeared in the transaction as the intended buyer's agent on the other side. They had structured it so that the sale would pass through Dwight's Investment LLC, which would allow them to capture both the commission and a cut of the proceeds in a way that, Ed said, would take an accountant about 4 minutes to identify as fraud. I sat in Ed's office and I listened to all of this, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder than anger. I had driven a city bus for 31 years. I'd shown up every single day, in the snow, in the August heat, when I had a fever and when my back hurt, and the one morning I got the call that my father had died, and I finished my route before I told anyone because there were people on that bus who needed to get to work. I had done everything the right way, my entire life, and my son had forged my signature. "What are our options?" I said. Ed leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a moment. "The honest answer," he said, "is that your options are excellent. The fraudulent deed hasn't been recorded. The sale hasn't closed. We can go to the county recorder's office and flag the property today with a notice of fraudulent claim, which will block any title transfer. We can file a police report, which creates a criminal record of the forgery. And we can contact the Ohio Division of Real Estate about the agent's conduct." "What about Dwight?" "That's where it gets interesting," Ed said. "If we can show that Dwight knew the ownership documentation was fraudulent, and given that he structured the purchase through his own LLC, that's going to be a hard case for him to argue against. We're looking at fraud charges, potentially wire fraud, if any of this crossed email or electronic communication. And Cole?" Ed didn't answer right away. He knew this was the hard part. "That's your call, Hal," he said. "He's your son. Whatever you want to do, I'll support it. But I want to be honest with you. What he did is a crime. Forgery is a crime. Filing false documents with a real estate agent is a crime. If you want to protect yourself going forward and ensure this can't happen again, there are legal steps we should take regardless of what you decide about Cole personally." I looked out the window. Ed's office is on the 4th floor of a building on Vine Street, and from where I sat I could see a stretch of the city I had driven through for 3 decades. The streets I knew by heart. "Do everything," I said. "All of it. I'll figure out the rest later." I went home that evening and I cooked dinner. Pork chops, green beans, from a can the way Loretta used to make them, and cornbread from a box mix because I never quite mastered the real thing. I set the table for one, which is how I'd been eating for the past year and a half, despite having two other people living in my house, because Cole and Suzanne preferred to eat in the living room in front of the television. I sat at the kitchen table and I ate my dinner, and I did not say a word to either of them. The next morning, Ed called at 8 to let me know the fraudulent claim notice had been filed with the Hamilton County Recorder's Office. Any attempt to transfer or record a deed on the property would be automatically flagged. He had also spoken with a contact of the Cincinnati Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, and an officer would be in touch. At 9:15, Cole came downstairs. He looked surprised to see me at the table, which told me he'd expected the note to have sent me scrambling. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "Did you get my message?" he said. "I did. So you understand the situation?" "I understand several things," I said. "Sit down, Cole." He sat down. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and right now he was using the stubbornness. "Suzanne and I have been talking about this for a while," he said. "The house is too big for just you. The market is good right now. It makes financial sense to liquidate, and you can use your portion to get yourself something smaller, something more appropriate for." "Who told you that you owned half this house?" I said. He stopped. "It'll transfer when?" "Who told you that you owned half this house right now?" I said. "Today. Because someone gave you very bad information, and that person, whether that was Dwight or someone else, has put you in a very serious legal situation." The color changed in Cole's face. Not all at once, but in stages, like watching something drain. "The deed is in my name. Solely. Through a trust that Loretta and I established 15 years ago. The document you submitted to the listing agent is a forgery, Cole. My attorney flagged it with the county recorder's office yesterday morning, and a financial crimes detective will be calling you sometime today." He was very still. "I want you and Suzanne to understand something," I said. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my house. It was my house when you were born, and it was my house when your mother died in it, and it will be my house until I decide otherwise. What happens next, legally, is mostly out of my hands at this point, because certain things have already been set in motion. But what I want you to know, from me as your father, is that I am not angry. I am something much worse than angry. I'm disappointed in a way that I don't have words for yet." I pushed back my chair and stood up. "You should call a lawyer," I said. "Not Dwight's. Your own." The detective, a woman named Carla Webb from the Financial Crimes Unit, came to the house 2 days later. She was thorough and unhurried, the kind of person who has heard every version of every story and doesn't need anyone to perform a motion for her. She documented the forged deed, the notary stamp, which turned out to belong to a notary who had retired in 2021 and whose stamp had apparently been acquired through Dwight's network, and the internal listing submission. Dwight was arrested 4 days after that. The charge was forgery and attempted real estate fraud, both felonies under Ohio law. When his LLC was examined, investigators found 2 other properties where similar schemes had been attempted, one successfully. An elderly woman in blue ash who had signed documents she didn't fully understand after Dwight's associate spent 3 weeks building a relationship with her family. That case was added to the charges. Cole was not arrested. I want to be clear about that and about why. Ed and I had several conversations, and what I ultimately told him was this: I did not want to file charges against my son. Not because what he did wasn't wrong, it was deeply wrong, and I think some part of Cole knew that by the time the detective sat down with him, but Cole was, I believe, more naive than malicious. He had let Dwight lead him somewhere he should never have gone, and he had convinced himself that because he would eventually inherit the house anyway, what he was doing was more of a shortcut than a crime. That is not a legal defense, and Ed made sure Cole understood that clearly. Cole cooperated fully with the investigation into Dwight, which the detective said was helpful. Cole and Suzanne moved out the week after Dwight's arrest. Cole left without saying much. On his way out the door, he paused in the entryway, the same entryway where I'd watched him leave for his first day of kindergarten, for prom, for college, and he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." Just that. I nodded. I didn't know what else to do with it yet. There are things you have to put in a drawer and come back to when you're ready. Suzanne didn't say anything. She carried a box past me to their car and didn't meet my eyes. I've thought about her role in all of this, and I think she was more architect than Cole was. But I can't prove that, and the detective said the same thing. What I know is that the house felt different the morning after they left. Not empty, quieter, in a way that was actually peaceful for the first time in a long while. I did 3 things in the weeks that followed. The first thing I did was call my financial advisor, a man named Terry at a firm in Blue Ash I'd worked with for years, and I updated every beneficiary designation on every account I held. I also amended the trust with Ed's help, adding a provision that any challenge to the trust's assets during my lifetime would result in that challenger forfeiting their beneficiary rights entirely. It's a standard provision. Ed said he recommended it to all his clients. I wished he'd recommended it 20 years ago. The second thing I did was plant the back garden. Loretta always kept a vegetable garden along the back fence. Tomatoes, cucumbers, a row of green peppers she was particular about. I'd let it go after she passed. That spring, I turned the soil, bought some seedlings from the nursery on Glenway Avenue, and put in tomatoes and peppers and a row of basil because I'd started to learn to cook Italian. It was good work, the kind of work that asks nothing from you except your attention. The third thing I did was call my neighbour Bud, who was 71 and a retired letter carrier, and who has been my closest friend since 1994. I told him the whole story. We sat on my back porch with iced tea. Neither of us drink anymore, and Bud listened to all of it without interrupting, which is the rarest quality in a person, I've decided. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You doing okay?" he said. "I think so," I said. "Ask me again in a year." He nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Toll called me in August, about 4 months after everything. He asked if he could come by. I said yes. He looked tired. He'd ended things with Suzanne, or she'd ended things with him. He was vague about that part, and I didn't push. He was staying in an apartment in Norwood and working again, something in logistics closer to what he'd been doing before Dwight came into the picture. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read that note on that Tuesday morning, and we talked for 3 hours. It was not easy. Some of it was very hard. But there is a difference, I've learned, between trust that has been damaged and trust that has been destroyed. And as a father, you spend a long time trying to figure out which one you're actually dealing with. I haven't fully figured that out yet. I'm not sure I need to have it figured out by any particular deadline. What I told Cole at the end of that conversation was this: the house will come to him one day. That was always the plan. That is still the plan. But that day will come when I am gone. And not 1 moment sooner, and not as a shortcut, and not through any scheme that treats his father's life's work as an inconvenient obstacle to be routed around. He sat with that for a while. Then he said, "Can I help you with the garden?" I looked at him for a moment. He had his mother's eyes. "The tomatoes are getting out of hand," I said. "Bring old clothes." He came back the next Saturday and we spent the afternoon out in the yard, tying up the tomato plants and pulling weeds from the pepper row and not talking about any of it, which is sometimes the most important kind of talking there is. Loretta would have had opinions about the garden, and about all of it, and I could almost hear her in the sound of the afternoon. The neighbour's lawnmower 2 yards over, the birds in the oak tree, the particular silence of a summer day in Cincinnati, when everything is green and still, and there is nowhere else you are supposed to be. I'm still here. That note is still in my shirt pocket, the original one, folded and worn at the creases now. I kept it on purpose, not out of bitterness, but because some things you don't put away until you've understood everything they came to teach you. I'm still working on that part, but I have time. And I have my house,